the last Apache woman on the auction block, until a stranger bought her freedom. Her village, a small cluster of adobe homes and open spaces, had been her world since she was born. Here, the sun painted the skies in brilliant shades of orange and pink each morning, and the nights were filled with the gentle lullabies of the crickets. Her people, the Apache, lived closely with nature. They hunted, gathered, and moved with the seasons, respecting every animal, plant, and stone as part of the same great web of life. Nahel was not like other girls her age. She had a quiet strength that others noticed but few understood. She would spend hours alone, watching the horizon, imagining stories of the future while learning the lessons of the past. Her mother had taught her how to read the signs of the land, how to find water in the driest seasons, and how to know when the animals were near. Her father had taught her how to listen, not just to words, but to people, to the earth, and even to the wind. And yet, despite all the knowledge she had never prepared herself for the day that changed everything. It started like any other day. The sun was high in the sky, beating down on the earth and warming the stones of the village. Nahel had been helping her mother weave baskets when a distant sound reached her ears, a rhythm of galloping hooves, soft but growing louder with each passing moment. At first, she thought it was the traders from the neighboring village coming, as they often did. But soon she realized that the sound was different. It carried a strange energy, something that made her heart race. She looked toward the horizon and saw them, figures riding fast across the land, their shapes blurred by the sun and heat. Fear, a new and unwelcome visitor, settled in her chest. Her mother grabbed her hand instinctively, her eyes wide with a mixture of recognition and worry. The village had always been cautious, but this time the danger was unlike anything they had ever faced. Her father stepped forward, his calm presence trying to soothe the rising panic. "Nahel," he said softly, "we must stay calm and watch, do not run. Understand what is happening before you act." His voice, steady and warm, reminded her of the stories he told her when she was a little girl, stories of brave ancestors who had faced impossible challenges and survived. The riders came closer, their presence undeniable now. Nahel could see the shapes of their horses, strong and swift, and the glint of sunlight on the metal they carried. She did not understand their intentions fully, but instinct told her that this was not a friendly visit. Mothers called their children to safety, fathers gathered what they could protect, and the village elders moved with careful purpose. Nahel stayed close to her mother, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat and the steady pull of her hand. As the riders entered the village, a strange silence fell over everything. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. Nahel noticed the expressions on the faces of the villagers, fear, confusion, but also a quiet courage. No one screamed, no one ran blindly. They stood together, united in the way that people who had lived on this land for generations tend to do. Then, in a moment that seemed both sudden and inevitable, the village was surrounded. Nahel's heart pounded faster than it ever had before. She felt a coldness creep into her chest, a sensation she had never known. Her father held her close, whispering words she could barely hear, reminding her to be strong, to remember who she was, to hold on to the knowledge of her people no matter what happened next. They were taken quickly, almost too quickly to comprehend. The world that Nahel had known, her family, her home, the open skies and endless desert, vanished in the blink of an eye. She was pulled from the ground, carried along with others who shared her fate, her small hands gripping her mother's for dear life. The sound of the horses faded behind them, replaced by the harsh clatter of life moving too fast, a world she did not understand and could not control. During the journey, Nahel had time to think, to remember everything her parents had taught her. She thought about the rivers that ran through their lands, the stories of ancestors who had survived worse, the lessons of patience and observation. She reminded herself to breathe, to stay calm, to remember the strength she carried inside her. Even though fear threatened to overwhelm her, a tiny spark of hope remained. She did not know what would happen next, but she understood that she must survive, that she must keep her mind sharp and her spirit intact. At night, when the riders paused, Nahel would watch the stars. The sky was the same as it had always been, a blanket of silver dots stretching endlessly above. She remembered how her mother had taught her the constellations, how to read them as guides when the land seemed unfamiliar. The stars became her silent friends, her companions in a world that had suddenly become cold and uncertain. She whispered the old prayers under her breath, small words of hope and protection, trying to hold on to something familiar in the midst of chaos. Days passed, though they felt like weeks. She learned to move quietly, to listen carefully, to understand the moods and intentions of those around her. She observed the riders, noticing their patterns, their silences, the ways they treated each other. Some were cruel, some indifferent, and a few seemed almost human in their small gestures of kindness. Nahel's mind worked constantly, remembering her training, thinking ahead, and trying to imagine the next steps. Survival became a game of observation and patience. Despite the fear, Nahel found small ways to assert herself, tiny acts that reminded her of who she was. She would collect water from hidden streams, share what she could with those weaker than her, and speak softly to the animals they passed, as if trying to connect with the world she had lost. She noticed the wind again, its familiar caress reminding her that she still had a place in the world. Each small action became a declaration of life, a quiet rebellion against the helplessness that threatened to consume her. Her thoughts often returned to her family. She wondered if they were safe, if they were searching for her, if they even knew where she had gone. The pain of separation was sharp, but it also gave her strength. Every memory of home, every lesson learned from her parents became armor against despair. She promised herself silently that if she survived this ordeal, she would never forget who she was or where she came from. The journey continued, each day blending into the next. Nahel noticed the changing landscapes, from the flat plains to rocky hills and dry riverbeds. She learned to identify edible plants, to find shelter in unlikely places, and to anticipate the movements of the horses around her. Even in captivity, her mind remained free. She imagined her future, a life beyond this moment, and it gave her the courage to keep moving forward. Sometimes the riders would speak to her, their words sharp and commanding. But Nahel had learned to listen carefully, to understand their intentions without showing fear. She discovered that her quiet strength and calm demeanor often confused them. They expected panic, tears, or anger, but she offered none of those things. Instead, she offered stillness, observation, and patience. It was a different kind of power, subtle but effective. By the time they reached a small town near the edge of the territory, Nahel had changed in ways even she could not fully understand. She was no longer just a girl of the village. She was a survivor, keenly aware of the dangers of the world and the skills required to navigate them. She had learned lessons that could not be taught in a home or a school, lessons of resilience, observation, and inner strength. And though the fear had not left her, it had been tempered by the quiet fire of determination. For Nahel, the desert had always been a teacher, but now the world beyond it became a classroom too, harsh and unforgiving, yet filled with lessons that would shape her into someone extraordinary. She did not know what awaited her in the days to come, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would survive. She would carry the spirit of her people, the wisdom of her parents, and the strength she had discovered within herself. No matter what the future held, she would not lose herself. And so, as the sun set behind distant hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Nahel held her head high, her heart steady despite the uncertainty. The journey had only begun, and though the path ahead was unknown, she walked it with courage, determination, and the quiet hope that someday, somehow, she would find freedom again. Nahel had never seen anything like the town she was brought to. The streets were dusty, lined with small wooden buildings and filled with people speaking in voices that were loud and hurried. She felt out of place, a small figure in a world that seemed too fast, too bright, and too harsh. The riders who had brought her moved quickly, guiding her through the crowded streets. She kept her eyes low, her hands folded tightly, trying to make herself as small and unnoticed as possible. The town square was crowded with men, women, and children, though most of the attention was on the activity at the center. A large wooden platform had been built, and the crowd around it was thick, pressing forward eagerly to see what was happening. Nahel had never imagined anything like this. She could hear the sound of voices shouting, laughing, and arguing all at once. The noise made her head spin. Her heart beat rapidly, and for a moment she felt as though she might disappear if she closed her eyes. She was brought onto the platform, and the reality of her situation settled heavily on her shoulders. She looked out at the crowd and realized she was completely exposed. Every eye seemed to be on her, every movement she made noticed. The people around her did not see Nahel the girl, Nahel the daughter of her village, or Nahel the child of the desert. They saw her as something else, something to be measured, compared, and judged. Fear washed over her like a wave, but she forced herself to stand straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her panic. The auctioneer, a tall man with a booming voice, began to speak. He described her as if she were an object, listing her age, her strength, and skills she had learned through a lifetime of experience. Nahel listened carefully, trying to understand every word. Some of what he said made her feel invisible, as if the person she had always been had been replaced by something that belonged to others. She felt a surge of sadness and anger, but it was quickly buried under a careful calm. She would survive this. She had no choice but to remain strong. The crowd responded with shouts, bids, and laughter. Nahel tried to look away, but curiosity, or perhaps fear, made her glance at the faces around her. Some people looked amused, treating the event like a game. Others appeared serious, their expressions hard and calculating. A few eyes, however, held something else, something she could not understand at first. There was a flicker of concern, perhaps even recognition, but it was quickly hidden behind the more common emotions of excitement and greed. Nahel's thoughts turned inward. She remembered her parents' lessons about observation. Even in the worst of circumstances, understanding people could give her an advantage. She noticed how the crowd shifted with the sound of the auctioneer's voice, how they reacted to each announcement, and how the few who looked uneasy moved their hands or their eyes as if they wanted to reach out but did not dare. It was a strange kind of education, but she absorbed every detail, every movement, every sound. As the bidding began, Nahel felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. Men shouted numbers, pointing to each other or to the auctioneer. She did not understand the value they placed on her, the way they debated over her like she were an object. Her stomach churned, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, repeating the words her mother had taught her. Calm mind, steady heart. It was the only way to hold on to herself in a situation that tried to strip her identity away. Some of the bidders were young men, some older, and a few seemed uncertain about what they were doing. Nahel noticed how some of them whispered to each other, trying to make sure they did not overstep, while others acted with bold confidence, eager to win the highest bid. She realized that money and power created a strange and dangerous world she had never been part of, a world that measured people not by their character, but by what they could provide to someone else. Her gaze wandered across the crowd, and for a moment she spotted a small child watching quietly from the edge of the square. The child's eyes were wide, filled with curiosity but also a hint of fear. Nahel felt a pang of recognition. She remembered the children of her village, running through the streets with laughter, full of trust and innocence. That memory brought both sorrow and courage. She realized that her own courage was not just for herself, but for all those who could not protect themselves in this harsh world. As the auction continued, Nahel began to understand more about the people around her. Some were driven purely by greed, some by the thrill of the event, and some, though rare, by a quiet sense of respect or fairness. She learned to read their expressions carefully, to notice the slight hesitation of one man, the nervous tapping of another, the quick glance exchanged between two men who seemed to be deciding something privately. Every small detail became important, every movement a clue to their intentions. Despite the fear, Nahel did not let herself shrink entirely. She held her head high, letting her calm presence speak for her. There was power in dignity, even in a situation designed to take it away. Some in the crowd noticed it, some ignored it, but she continued to stand with quiet strength. The world might try to claim her body, but it could not yet claim her mind. Hours seemed to pass as the auction dragged on. Nahel's mind wandered to her village, to the people she loved, to the land that had shaped her. She remembered the stories of her ancestors, stories of survival, resilience, and cleverness. She thought of how her people had adapted to the harshest of conditions, finding ways to thrive where others could not. These thoughts were a balm to her spirit, a reminder that even in captivity, she carried something no one could take away. Then, in the midst of the bidding, something changed. A man she had not seen before entered the square. He moved with a calm confidence, not shouting, not pushing, not trying to dominate. He simply observed, standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the proceedings with a careful interest. There was a gentleness in his eyes, a kind of respect that Nahel had not expected to see here. For the first time since she had been taken from her village, a small spark of hope flickered inside her. The stranger did not speak at first. He let the auction continue, studying the crowd, studying the auctioneer, and most importantly, studying her. Nahel felt his gaze not as a threat, but as an acknowledgement of her presence as a person, not just a prize. That recognition, so simple and rare, strengthened her resolve. She realized that freedom might still be possible, even in this strange and frightening place. As the bidding approached its highest point, tension filled the air. Men shouted louder, trying to outdo each other, while Nahel remained calm, observing and learning. She noticed the patterns in the bids, the strategy of the men, and the rhythm of the auctioneer's voice. She understood that every moment counted, that every decision could change the outcome of her life. The crowd did not see it, but she was quietly shaping her own understanding of the world, preparing herself for what might come next. Then, the stranger finally stepped forward. He did not shout, he did not push, and he did not act with haste. He offered his bid calmly, confidently, and without hesitation. The auctioneer paused, surprised by the sudden intervention. The crowd murmured, some laughing, some whispering, and some simply watching with curiosity. Nahel felt a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. She did not yet understand who this man was or why he had come, but his actions promised something she had almost forgotten: freedom. The bidding continued, but it was clear that the stranger was determined. He matched and exceeded the offers of the others, not with anger but with quiet resolve. Nahel watched carefully, noticing the way he treated the auctioneer with respect, the way he glanced at her with kindness, and the way he held himself with dignity. Each of these details reassured her, even as the crowd grew louder and more impatient. Finally, the moment came when the auctioneer declared that the stranger had won. Nahel felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. She had been terrified that no one would see her as more than a commodity, that no one would act with compassion in this harsh world. And yet here was someone who had acted with courage and kindness, willing to defy the expectations of the crowd to give her a chance at freedom. Even as she was led away from the platform, Nahel's mind remained alert. She understood that freedom would not come easily, that the journey ahead would still be difficult. But for the first time in weeks, she felt the warmth of hope. The stranger had not only purchased her release, but had also restored something deeper, a sense that the world could still hold people who acted with integrity and care. Nahel held on to that feeling as they moved through the town. The crowd began to disperse, leaving behind the dust, noise, and chaos. She could hear the echo of her own heart, steady and strong. The stranger walked beside her, calm and watchful, guiding her not with force but with quiet assurance. In that moment, Nahel realized that survival was not just about enduring hardship, but also about recognizing the small acts of goodness that could shape a life. For Nahel, the auction block had been a place of fear, uncertainty, and loss. But it had also become a place of learning, observation, and the first spark of hope for a future she could once again shape for herself. She had faced the harshest test of her life and had survived with her dignity intact. And now, as the sun dipped low behind the buildings, painting the dusty streets in shades of gold and orange, she took a deep breath, ready to begin the next stage of her journey, carrying with her the quiet courage that had always been inside her. The stranger walked slowly. Through the crowd, his movements calm and deliberate. He did not push anyone aside or speak loudly to demand attention. Instead, he allowed the noise of the town square to fill the air around him, letting his presence be known without arrogance. Nahel, still on the platform, watched him closely. Something about the way he carried himself made her heart settle slightly, though she was far from fully at ease. The auctioneer continued with his announcements, calling for higher bids. Nahel felt a tightness in her chest. Every shout, every hand raised, reminded her of the precariousness of her situation. She thought of her parents and the lessons they had taught her about patience and observation. She had survived this long by watching, listening, and thinking carefully about every movement and every word. She would need those same skills now more than ever. The stranger finally stepped closer to the front of the platform. His eyes met hers briefly, and for a moment she saw something she had not expected: compassion. It was not pity, nor was it fleeting curiosity. It was a quiet understanding, a recognition of her humanity that no one else in this place seemed capable of offering. She felt a shiver of hope run through her. Perhaps her story was not over yet. He raised his hand slightly and spoke a few words to the auctioneer, who paused mid-sentence. The auctioneer glanced at the stranger, then at the crowd, and back at the stranger again. There was a moment of hesitation, a small ripple of surprise that passed through the people around them. Nahel could feel it in the air, the quiet tension, the shift in energy that happens when something unexpected interrupts the usual order. The bidding resumed, but the stranger did not speak again immediately. He seemed to measure the situation, taking in every detail. Nahel noticed that some of the previous bidders looked frustrated, muttering under their breath, adjusting their hats, or shifting their weight nervously. They had expected her to be sold quickly, without interruption. They did not anticipate that someone would appear who did not treat her as a mere object, who would challenge the rules of this strange, frightening event simply by existing. As the auction continued, Nahel began to understand the strategy of the stranger. He did not rush, he did not yell. He placed his bids deliberately with careful timing and in a way that suggested he was not concerned about how others perceived him. There was patience in his approach, a sense of calm confidence that intrigued Nahel. She had learned, in the weeks since being taken from her village, that people often revealed their true intentions through small gestures, and she watched him closely. Some of the men bidding against him grew visibly annoyed. They shouted louder, waved their hands, and tried to intimidate the stranger. But he remained composed, returning their gestures only with steady eye contact and polite acknowledgement. The crowd began to notice the difference. Murmurs passed from one person to another. This man was not like the others. He did not treat the event as a game or a spectacle. He seemed to treat it with seriousness, with respect for the life that was at the center of it. Nahel felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. She did not know this man, and she could not yet trust him completely. But she could see that his intentions were different from those around her. He was not here for amusement or profit alone. There was something about his calm presence, the way he observed without judgment, that told her he might be someone who could help her. The auctioneer's voice rose again, calling for one final round of bids. The crowd leaned forward eagerly, some shouting higher numbers, some clapping in excitement. Nahel's heart pounded. She focused on the stranger, trying to read his expression. His eyes were steady, unwavering. He was not reacting to the chaos around him. Instead, he seemed focused entirely on her, as if understanding that her life, her freedom, depended on this moment. Finally, he raised his hand and called out his bid. The auctioneer's voice faltered for just a moment before repeating the number to the crowd. There was a brief silence, broken only by the whisper of wind and the shuffling of feet. Then one man shouted higher and another followed. The stranger did not respond immediately. He let the bidding continue for a few moments, studying the others, studying the energy of the crowd, and then, with quiet determination, he raised his bid again. It was clear to everyone that this stranger was serious. The previous bidders hesitated, their confidence shaken. Some dropped out entirely, muttering complaints, while others struggled to match his calm but deliberate determination. Nahel could feel the tension rising. Every second that passed seemed to stretch into an eternity. Her mind raced, trying to prepare for the possibility of failure, yet she clung to the faint glimmer of hope the stranger represented. As the bidding neared its conclusion, the crowd grew restless. Some shouted, some laughed nervously, and some simply watched with wide eyes. Nahel noticed that even the auctioneer, who was used to controlling the energy of these events, seemed uncertain. The presence of this stranger had changed everything. It was no longer just a matter of money or competition. It was a test of integrity, patience, and courage. Nahel's thoughts turned inward. She remembered the lessons her parents had taught her. Strength is not only physical, but also mental. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. And hope is the light that can guide even in the darkest times. She repeated these ideas to herself silently, letting them strengthen her resolve. She would remain calm, alert, and ready for whatever happened next. Then the final moment arrived. The stranger called out his last bid, and this time no one challenged him. The auctioneer's voice rang out, declaring him the winner. Relief flooded Nahel's body in a way she had not felt since being taken from her village. Her legs, tired from standing, seemed lighter, and her chest loosened as she exhaled slowly. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of possibility. Freedom was no longer a distant dream. It was within reach. The crowd began to disperse, their excitement fading into murmurs of disbelief and curiosity. Nahel felt the stranger's presence beside her. He spoke softly, almost more to himself than to her, reassuring her in a way that did not demand gratitude but offered protection. His calm, steady voice reminded her of her father's words long ago. "Stay observant, stay patient, and your strength will guide you." She realized that she could trust him, at least enough to follow his lead for now. As they moved through the town, Nahel noticed the reactions of others. Some watched with suspicion, others with relief, and a few with admiration. The auction had ended, but the story it created would remain in the minds of the townspeople for a long time. Nahel understood that this event was not just about her. It was a moment that challenged the assumptions of the people around her. It showed that courage, respect, and integrity could exist even in a place where fear and greed often dominated. The stranger led her through quiet back streets, away from the lingering eyes of the crowd. He offered her water and food, gestures that seemed simple but carried great meaning. Nahel accepted, feeling the warmth of kindness that had been absent for so long. She realized that freedom was not just a physical state. It was also the presence of someone who treated her as a human being rather than a possession. During the walk, the stranger spoke quietly, asking her questions about her journey, her needs, and her comfort. He did not press her for details she was not ready to share, nor did he act impatiently when she hesitated. Every word, every gesture, reinforced a sense of safety she had not known since being taken from her village. For Nahel, this was as important as the act of winning her freedom itself. It was the beginning of a journey where she could once again feel respected, valued, and understood. By the time they reached a small, quiet house on the edge of town, Nahel felt exhaustion wash over her. She had been on the platform for hours, her mind alert and tense, and her body weary from weeks of travel and uncertainty. Yet she also felt a strange excitement. The world beyond the auction block, which had seemed so frightening, was beginning to reveal possibilities she had not imagined. She was free now, but her mind remained sharp, ready for the challenges and adventures that lay ahead. That night, as she lay on a simple bed in the stranger's home, Nahel reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the crowd, the auctioneer, and the strange mixture of fear and hope she had experienced. She thought about the lessons she had learned about observation, patience, and the quiet power of dignity. Most of all, she thought about the stranger, whose courage and kindness had given her a second chance. Nahel understood that her journey was far from over. Freedom was only the first step. The world outside the auction block was vast, unpredictable, and often dangerous. But she had survived the worst of it, and she had done so with her mind sharp, her spirit resilient, and her heart open to possibility. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to dream of the future, not as a captive, but as a young woman capable of shaping her own destiny. The stranger, noticing her thoughts, said quietly, "Rest now. Tomorrow is another day, but you are safe tonight." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of reassurance that Nahel had been craving. She nodded, allowing herself to relax slightly, feeling the tension in her body ease. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small measure of peace, the kind that comes when one realizes that survival is possible and that hope can endure even in the most challenging circumstances. Nahel fell asleep with the stars visible through the small window, thinking of the desert, her village, and her family. She did not know when or if she would return, but she knew that the lessons she had learned, the courage she had discovered, and the kindness she had been shown would guide her. The auction block was behind her, but the story of her life was far from finished. She was free now, and freedom, she realized, was only the beginning of the journey. Nahel's first night of true freedom was strange and quiet. The soft rustle of the trees outside the small house was a comfort she had not realized she missed. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe without fear of being watched or judged. Yet even in this safety, a part of her remained alert. The world she had entered beyond the auction block was unfamiliar and unpredictable, and she knew that survival required more than just relief. It required constant awareness. The stranger, whose name she had learned was Elias, moved around the house with calm efficiency. He did not speak much, but his presence was steady and reassuring. He left water and food within her reach and gave her a blanket, simple gestures that reminded her that freedom was not only about leaving danger behind, it was also about care and respect. Nahel took the food quietly, unsure of how to express her gratitude without words. She had long learned that actions often carried more meaning than speech, and she resolved to repay kindness with trust and cooperation. Morning arrived with soft light spilling through the window. Nahel awoke to the smell of bread baking, a gentle warmth filling the small room. Elias had prepared a simple meal, and though the town beyond their walls seemed calm, she knew that challenges could appear at any moment. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and allowed herself a small moment of relief. Freedom was sweet, but it was fragile, and she could not forget that the world outside was still full of uncertainties. After breakfast, Elias spoke for the first time about the journey ahead. "We will need to move carefully," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "There are people who would try to take advantage of you. Even now, others may not understand why I acted as I did." Nahel listened intently. She had learned in her short but intense experience that words often contained clues, guidance, and warnings. Elias' calm tone reassured her, even as it reminded her that vigilance remained necessary. They began their journey just as the sun rose higher, painting the landscape in gold and shadow. Elias led them along small paths and hidden routes, avoiding main roads where travelers might notice them. Nahel marveled at the careful planning, the quiet strategy, and the thought that went into each step. For someone new to the town and its customs, these lessons were invaluable. She began to understand that freedom was not just the absence of chains. It was also the knowledge of how to move safely in the world. As they traveled, Elias taught her small skills that she had not used before. He showed her how to read the signs of the land, the tracks left by animals, the direction of the wind, and the patterns of birds in the sky. He encouraged her to pay attention to details, to anticipate what might happen next, and to trust her instincts. These lessons reminded her of her parents' teachings in the village. The desert had trained her, but now the world beyond required a different kind of awareness, one that combined knowledge, patience, and observation. Nahel listened carefully, absorbing every word. She noticed the kindness in Elias' voice and the patience with which he taught her. He never acted superior or dismissive. Instead, he treated her as a capable young woman, one who could learn quickly and make her own decisions. This approach reminded her of her father, who had always encouraged her to think for herself and trust her own judgment. In the weeks since her capture, Nahel had felt powerless, but now she began to feel a growing sense of agency. The journey was not easy. The terrain was rough, filled with rocky paths, dry riverbeds, and hidden dips that could easily cause injury. But Elias guided them steadily, allowing her to test her own balance and strength. He encouraged her to move confidently, not fearfully, and to trust that she could manage more than she had imagined. Each step became a small triumph, each challenge a reminder that she was more capable than she had realized. As they traveled, Nahel also observed Elias' behavior carefully. He was calm in moments of uncertainty, patient when the path was difficult, and respectful of her pace and space. She began to see him not just as a stranger who had bought her freedom, but as a teacher, a guide, and perhaps even a friend. She realized that trust was built slowly, through actions rather than words, and she felt a growing sense of confidence that she could rely on him while still maintaining her independence. Despite the careful travel, Nahel occasionally caught glimpses of people from a distance. Some were travelers on the same paths, moving with purpose and speed. Others were small groups of townspeople, curious and alert. Elias remained calm each time, guiding her away from potential danger and teaching her how to notice signs that someone might follow or watch. Nahel understood that freedom was not just about leaving captivity behind. It was also about learning to move safely in a world that could be unpredictable. During one particularly long day, they paused near a small stream. Nahel knelt to drink, feeling the cool water rush over her hands. The simple act of hydration, something she had taken for granted in her village, felt like a small gift. She glanced at Elias, who was watching her with a quiet smile, and realized that she had not been this safe or cared for in a long time. Relief and gratitude welled up inside her, mingled with the cautious awareness that their journey was still far from over. As they rested, Elias began to share stories of his own life. He spoke of places he had visited, challenges he had faced, and lessons he had learned along the way. Nahel listened, fascinated. His words painted pictures of a world far beyond the one she had known, full of opportunities, challenges, and unexpected kindnesses. She realized that freedom was not just a physical state. It was also the ability to dream, to imagine possibilities beyond the immediate circumstances, and to trust that people could act with integrity even in difficult situations. The days passed in a careful rhythm of walking, resting, and learning. Nahel began to feel the weight of her body ease slightly, her muscles strengthening from the physical demands of travel. She also felt the weight in her mind shift, from constant fear to a focused awareness of her surroundings and possibilities. Each day, she became more attuned to the landscape, to the small signs of life around her, and to the lessons Elias shared. One afternoon, as they crossed a rocky hill, Nahel spotted movement in the distance. A group of travelers appeared along a narrow path below. She tensed, instinctively crouching behind a boulder. Elias noticed immediately but did not panic. He whispered instructions, guiding her to remain calm and observe. The travelers passed without noticing them, but the exercise reinforced the importance of vigilance. Nahel realized that even in freedom, caution remained essential. Survival was not just about escaping captivity. It was about understanding the world and moving through it with awareness. That night, as they camped under a canopy of stars, Nahel allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the auction block, the fear and humiliation she had endured, and the courage it had taken to survive. She thought about Elias, whose quiet determination had changed the course of her life. And she thought about herself, the inner strength she had discovered through months of uncertainty. She felt a mixture of pride, gratitude, and cautious hope. Elias watched the fire burn and spoke softly, not to instruct, but to share a thought. "The world can be harsh," he said, "but it can also be full of unexpected kindness. Sometimes the smallest choices can change a life." Nahel nodded, understanding deeply what he meant. She had seen the worst of fear and uncertainty, but she had also seen that one person's courage could restore hope, even in the darkest moments. As they continued their journey, Nahel began to see more signs of life around her. Small villages appeared in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, and children running through fields. Each glimpse reminded her of her own village, of the laughter, warmth, and community she had known. She realized that her journey was not just about reaching safety. It was also about remembering who she was and what she had lost, so she could build a life that honored her past and embraced the future. By the time they reached a quiet, forested area far from the town, Nahel felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had survived the auction, navigated the challenges of the journey, and learned new skills that would help her remain free and independent. She looked at Elias, gratitude and respect shining in her eyes. She understood that freedom was more than escaping captivity. It was the knowledge, courage, and relationships that allowed a person to thrive. As they settled near a small, hidden stream for the night, Nahel felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that challenges would continue to appear, but she also knew that she was capable of facing them. The lessons she had learned, the courage she had discovered, and the kindness she had experienced had strengthened her in ways she had never imagined. She was no longer just a girl taken from her village. She was a young woman who had survived, learned, and grown stronger through every trial. And as the stars glittered above, Nahel allowed herself a quiet smile. The journey was not over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that she could face the future with courage, patience, and hope. Freedom was no longer just a distant dream. It was real, tangible, and full of possibilities, waiting for her to embrace it with every step she took. The days passed quietly, but Nahel felt a growing excitement she had not experienced in months. She and Elias had traveled far from the town where she had been auctioned, moving through hills, valleys, and forests that seemed untouched by the chaos she had left behind. Each day, the sun rose and fell in familiar patterns, painting the world in gold and orange, and she felt herself becoming more attuned to the rhythm of life outside captivity. Every step forward was a step toward a new beginning, a chance to reclaim the parts of herself that had been hidden under fear and uncertainty. Nahel often walked a little ahead of Elias, exploring the land, observing the birds, the streams, and the trees. Her senses, sharpened by weeks of careful attention, allowed her to notice the subtle signs of life. A bird taking flight, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, or the smell of fresh water all became signals she could read and understand. Elias encouraged her curiosity, asking questions, offering guidance when needed, but always allowing her to learn and make decisions for herself. This freedom to act, to think, and to grow was as important as physical safety, and Nahel felt the joy of it deeply. One morning, as they crested a small hill, the view below took Nahel's breath away. A valley stretched out before her, dotted with green fields, a few scattered cottages, and a sparkling river that wound through the land like a ribbon of silver. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, and she could see people moving about their daily routines, tending to animals and carrying baskets of food. It was a peaceful place, far from the chaos of towns and auction blocks, and something in her heart stirred. She knew instinctively that this valley could be a place to rest, to heal, and perhaps even to start a new life. As they descended into the valley, Elias explained that this area was home to a small, welcoming community. The people here valued kindness, honesty, and hard work, and they were known for helping travelers who needed shelter. Nahel felt a surge of gratitude and relief. She had learned to be cautious, to watch and wait, but for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she might find a safe, permanent place to call home. The villagers welcomed them with polite curiosity. They asked about their journey, offered water and food, and treated Nahel with respect and dignity. For the first time since being taken from her village, she felt the absence of fear in every interaction. She was treated as a person, not as an object, and the warmth of their hospitality filled her heart with a quiet joy. It was a reminder that kindness could exist even in a world that had often seemed cruel and harsh. Nahel and Elias spent several days in the valley, resting and learning about the community. She watched the villagers as they worked together, planting fields, tending animals, and sharing meals. She began to see the value of cooperation, patience, and shared effort, and she realized that life was not just about survival. It was about building connections, learning from others, and contributing to the community. For the first time, she imagined a future where she could not only survive but thrive. Elias continued to guide her, helping her navigate her feelings and her past. He never pressured her to speak about her experiences, but he offered a steady presence whenever she needed reassurance. Slowly, Nahel began to talk about her family, her village, and the lessons she had learned from her parents. She spoke of the desert, the rivers, and the animals, of the quiet strength of her people, and the importance of resilience. Each story she shared reminded her of who she was and helped her reclaim a sense of identity that had been tested but never broken. One day, as Nahel explored near the river, she noticed a small group of children playing. Their laughter was bright and pure, echoing through the valley, and it stirred something deep within her. She remembered the children of her own village, their faces, their games, and their songs. She felt a pang of longing, but also a sense of connection. She approached the children slowly, at first unsure how they would react. But they welcomed her curiosity, sharing their games and laughter, and Nahel felt a sense of belonging she had not known in a long time. The days turned into weeks, and Nahel began to find her place within the community. She helped tend the fields, cared for small animals, and learned new skills from the villagers. Each task, no matter how simple, became a way to rebuild her confidence and independence. She discovered that freedom was not just about leaving captivity behind. It was about having the ability to choose, to act, and to grow in a supportive environment. Elias remained a constant presence, guiding her when necessary but allowing her space to explore and learn. He shared stories of his own life, tales of travel, challenges, and acts of courage. Nahel listened, fascinated, and realized that freedom also meant the opportunity to learn from others, to gain knowledge and wisdom that could help her navigate the world. She began to understand that life was not simply about escaping danger. It was about building a life filled with meaning, connections, and hope. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Elias and Nahel sat by the river. The water reflected the colors of the sky, and the gentle sound of flowing water created a sense of peace. Elias spoke quietly. "You have come a long way, Nahel. You have survived, learned, and grown stronger. But the journey is not over. Life will always bring challenges, but now you have the skills, the courage, and the strength to face them." Nahel listened, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. She realized how far she had come, from a girl taken from her village, to a young woman who had faced fear and uncertainty, learned new skills, and embraced freedom with courage and dignity. She thought of her parents, of the desert, and of the lessons that had guided her even in the darkest moments. She knew that those lessons were now a part of her, and that they would continue to guide her for the rest of her life. As weeks turned into months, Nahel fully embraced her new life in the valley. She developed friendships, contributed to the community, and found moments of joy in the simple pleasures of daily life. The warmth of the sun on her face, the laughter of children, the quiet beauty of the river. She realized that freedom was not just the absence of captivity, but the presence of opportunity, dignity, and connection. Elias eventually prepared to leave the valley, knowing that his role in her journey was coming to an end. Nahel felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness. He had been her guide, protector, and friend, helping her navigate the most difficult chapter of her life. She knew that she would never forget his kindness, courage, and quiet strength. Before leaving, he spoke softly. "Remember, Nahel, your strength comes from within. You have survived, and now you have the power to shape your life." Nahel watched him go, feeling a sense of independence and confidence she had never felt before. She was no longer a captive, no longer defined by fear or uncertainty. She was free, capable, and ready to face the future on her own terms. The lessons of the past, the courage she had discovered, and the kindness she had received had all shaped her into a young woman prepared for the world. Life in the valley continued, and Nahel began to think about her long-term future. She imagined ways to use her experiences to help others, to teach children, and to contribute to the community that had welcomed her. She realized that her journey had not only been about survival, but also about growth, learning, and the opportunity to create a life filled with meaning. She felt a sense of purpose she had never known before, a feeling that her life could be more than merely existing. It could be full of hope, connection, and joy. One day, as she walked along the riverbank, Nahel thought about her family and village. She did not know if she would ever return, but she felt a sense of peace. She carried the lessons of her past within her, the strength, resilience, and courage of her people. She knew that even if she never saw her village again, it would always be a part of her, guiding her decisions and shaping the person she had become. Nahel's story in the valley became one of quiet inspiration. Villagers noticed her determination, her curiosity, and her willingness to help others. She became a bridge between the wisdom of her past and the opportunities of her present. Her presence reminded everyone that even after hardship, kindness, courage, and hope could shape a life in extraordinary ways. As the seasons changed, Nahel continued to grow in confidence and independence. She explored the valley, learned new skills, and built strong relationships with the people around her. She found joy in small moments, the laughter of children, the blooming of flowers in spring, and the warmth of a community that accepted her fully. She understood that freedom was not just an external state, but a reflection of the life she was now able to build for herself. One evening, under a sky filled with stars, Nahel reflected on her journey. She remembered the auction block, the fear, the uncertainty, and the small spark of hope that Elias had provided. She thought of the strength she had discovered within herself, the skills she had learned, and the courage that had carried her through. And she realized, with a deep sense of fulfillment, that she had not only survived, but had transformed her life into something meaningful, beautiful, and hopeful. Nahel smiled quietly to herself, feeling a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but she also knew that she was ready. She had learned that courage, patience, and hope were her most powerful tools. And as the river flowed gently beside her, reflecting the light of the stars, she felt a profound connection to the world, to her people, and to the life she was now free to live. For Nahel, the journey from the auction block to the valley had been more than a path to freedom. It had been a path to self-discovery, resilience, and empowerment. She understood now that true freedom was not only the absence of chains, but also the presence of hope, opportunity, and the courage to embrace life fully. And with that knowledge, Nahel stepped confidently into her new beginning, ready to face the future with strength, dignity, and joy.